Hey everyone, welcome to You and the Law podcast. We're streaming live on Facebook Live. We want to thank you for tuning in and joining us for another episode of the podcast show. I am Virgil Green, one of the co-hosts of the show, and the guy on the other part of the screen goes by the name of Chief Swag. How you doing?
What's going on, brother? How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Man, I'm doing good, doing good. So, hey, we want to let everybody know if this is your first time listening to You and the Law podcast, this is one of the most informative uh, podcast shows where we talk real talk about policing in America with two veteran law enforcement executives. And if this is your first time tuning in, we want to thank you for listening. And if you can also check us out uh, on Anchor. You can also check us out on Spotify. You can check us out on Google Podcasts and any other platforms that you listen to. You can find You and the Law. Just go in and type and search You and the Law. So, Chief Swag, we got a topic tonight that we're going to be talking about is probable cause and reasonable suspicion. I think that's going to be a good topic, and also to get your knowledge behind what is probable cause and reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, I think this is a top. These are two topics that a lot of people don't understand. I think this topic has gotten a lot of people, a lot of officers in trouble.
Yeah,
I think it's gotten a lot of. It's caused a lot of cases to be thrown out. I think people may even get the two switched, but these are based on constitutional laws,
yeah,
and yeah, I think this is a great topic, and I want we want people to call in or write in and let's talk about it.
exactly. And we're going to put up the topic of the show, which is going to be probable cause and reasonable suspicion. And if you got questions or comments, uh, you can ask your questions in the chat room, and we'll see those pop up, and we'll definitely chat with you about it. And if you got any questions about what is probable cause and reasonable suspicion, hopefully we can shed some informative information with you all about these two topics. And Keith, there was a video that I was trying to put on with our podcast, and it really caught my attention. It was out of California. Kind of give you a little backstory on what took place. Uh, this uh, African couple, husband and wife, own a clothing store in this community in California, the only black clothing store in this city. So about 2 o'clock in the morning, they noticed police officers kind of passing by, watching them. And at some point, Keith, the officer came up, knocked on the door. Uh, this gentleman named Yemen, he goes to the door, and the officer asks, hey, what are you guys doing? He says, hey, we're in here working. He says, so why are you working so late? So this went on for probably a good 10, 20 minutes back and forth. The owner of the store did not want to tell these officers, they asked, was he the owner? He said, why? So this goes back to one of the things that the officers said in their conversation with this owner of the store was that they had this reasonable suspicion to believe that some kind of crime was being committed. Uh, and even to the point, Keith, in this video, where they tell this owner, because they got so frustrated with him, hey, you should be glad that we're even here. And, you know, but what really changed the whole course of everything was that It took the phone call of a white owner of another business somewhere in that area to call and tell these officers that this man was in fact the owner of the store. As soon as they received that information, they immediately left. Now, he has since sued this city and the police department, and there was a out of court settlement. But he made his point was, why did it take a white man to call to tell you all that I own the store? If I had been a white man, you wouldn't have been harassing me, asking me, do I own the store, asking me to put my keys in the lock so you can see that I am the owner of the store. Why should I have to do that when you're not going to do that with somebody else? And I think, Keith, this is what get police officers in so much trouble. And this is why cities end up finding themselves facing lawsuits, because officers go through the training, receive the knowledge about probable cause and reasonable suspicion, and they want to articulate that into their own narrative. And so hopefully tonight we can, have some dialogue about the two, because as you stated, Keith, a lot of people get the two confused.
They do. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, Virgil, there are just some people, some officers that don't understand it, and they'll throw that out there. Well, I have reasonable suspicion. And they don't realize that, something might be suspicious, but as soon as you find out that it's not, you have a responsibility to back off. Now, there are times when reasonable suspicion can lead to probable cause, but it would have been just easy for them to, sir, can I see your driver's license or whatever, or just basically say, sir, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we disturbed you. We were just checking it out. I think that would have been a lot better. But I get what he's saying. You got, I own this shop. I've got to prove to you I own it, and then at the same time, you got to get someone else who's of another ethnicity to verify that I am the owner of this shop.
Well, and again, Keith, I guess why should, if you're inside of a business, you're working, I don't care what time, this incident took place about 2 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, you don't see any signs of people breaking in. Obviously, you don't see anybody running away from you when you do knock on the door and they come to the door. Any police officer in their right mind would have to assume that you've got something to do with this place of business.
Let me say this. I mean, in defense, that's not always the case, but I do think sometimes, in the time I've done it, I've made some really good arrests based on people doing that, try to pass the fact that they are that's their business. But like I said, there have been those times when I've been able to prove that that's not. So I get it to a point, but come on, man, you can't just keep making up excuses. Listen, there are going to be those times when there's just some things you just can't do. And, it comes down to, are you stretching to try to find something? And so, could they have done some alternate things to find out? Absolutely. But the question would be, and I'd be interested in reading that case to determine why they felt it necessary to not believe this man. I really would like to see that case to determine that.
Well, and Keith, I'm going to share this information with the listeners that, you can go to YouTube and you can just type in, the way how I found it was a black store owner in California questioned by police officers, and it'll pull up this video. And the name of this store is Yemen. It's a kind of a African type clothing store. But one of the things that what really kind of got me, Keith, was the fact that what de-escalation efforts did they take? Now, the store owner.
Well, Virgil, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Nikki brings up a good point. No, my thing was, I get it, and Nikki's right. The thing I was saying is, I would just like to see what the officer's response was. What did they write in the report? And that's what I would try. I just like to see what their justification was. Mm-hmm. Not that I would agree with it. I would just like to see. I'm always interested to see in these type of cases what the officer wrote. You know, did they embellish it? Did they leave something? That's what I'm saying.
Well, and you know, and again, I wish I could add this video to our podcast stream, but I've done everything I could to do so, and I'm gonna encourage those who are listening. Nikki and Tony, we definitely want to thank you guys for tuning into the podcast. And I think Nikki said she saw that video,
she did.
And you know, it was really concerning about it, Nikki, is the fact that race played, while they may say that it did not, race definitely played a factor in it, because it took another store owner who was white to call in and tell these officers, yes, in fact, he does own the store, and they immediately left. And so why did it take that owner of the store from another owner of another store to even call to get in to tell these officers that? And so, you know, Nikki says race was the sole factor. And it's sad because, again, and I think that's why, you know, Keith, the topics, our podcast shows, our topics are real talk with our those who tune in and listen to us, because I don't believe in trying to, if the officers were wrong, they were wrong. There again, this store owner even asked for the officer to call for a supervisor. And I've said this on many other podcast shows, Keith, that how do you know that this is a supervisor who's going to show it? It could just be another officer, because sometimes people see a sergeant stripes. That may be a supervisor, but for some agencies, it's a lieutenant or above that's a super, or especially a lieutenant. So yeah, you may have another officer who shows up who says, yeah, I'm the supervisor, but he's really not a supervisor.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. This was in Tiburon, California.
Yeah.
And says the sergeant resigns following police encounter. And so, yeah, I agree with you on that, man. And what citizens have to realize, you have the right to ask for a sergeant or a supervisor to come to the scene. And one of the things that you should ask, is this your first line supervisor? Is this the person that supervises you, or is this the highest ranking officer? Now, the highest ranking officer on the shift, especially on midnights, it's going to probably either be a sergeant or a lieutenant, but you have the right to ask. And if an officer is refusing to provide you that information, you can call 911, basically tell them where you are, and request that a supervisor come out to the scene. And so I think those are the things that our citizens, you know, need to know, that you do have a right to ask for a supervisor. And if a supervisor say they're not coming out to the scene, they're too busy doing paperwork, that's unacceptable. You know, this is something that could possibly, I've gone, you know what, Virgil, I've gone out on calls like this, and what I've told, once they tell me the details, you know, the officers will tell you a detail, and then you talk to the business owner or whatever, and then what they tell you, and then as a supervisor, you say, you know what, sir, I'm sorry for your inconvenience. Let me explain what happened. Not to say they were right, wrong, but this is why they did it. And you're more than welcome to make a complaint if you feel as though they violated policy. But I haven't seen the video. I'm interested in seeing the video, but I just want to know what those officers said to try to justify that. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, there is body cam,
and then I want to know why that sergeant resigned. What happened for that sergeant to resign?
Yeah. Well, there is body cam footage of it from the officers, and I think it's probably about somewhere a little over 10 minutes or maybe 20 minutes prior to them. It shows them walking up to the store, and it shows their entire encounter with this business owner. And again, I think, and we're going to get into what is probable cause and what is reasonable suspicion. And I think this case right here raises a lot of questions about how officers deal with citizens when, and this was at a business. Whether it's related to a business or related to showing up to somebody's house or even a traffic stop, how officers conduct themselves when it comes to probable cause.
Well, Nikki asked a good point. If an officer does not tell you why you're being stopped, either in a vehicle or a pedestrian, then you have to provide your ID. If an officer has a legal right to detain you, you do have to provide your ID. You have to provide a name, and that name must be, your information must be honest. You can't lie about what your name is. You can't give somebody an officer a false name if they have a legal right to detain you. That's the question. And so what I tell, and I've said this before, Nikki, on the podcast, the side of the road is not the location to have court. And so a lot of times it is best to provide that information. Must he tell you why you're being detained? We train the officers to give as much information as possible as soon as possible. Keep in mind, there might be a safety issue where they can't advise you why you're being detained at that particular moment, but as soon as possible, they have to tell you. But the majority of the traffic stops that are committed out here, they should be telling people why they're being stopped. That's what's called procedural justice. Basically, communicating with the citizen, letting them know why you stopped them, and then having that dialogue with them to tell, okay, this is what I saw. This is why I saw it. Now, if a citizen starts to debate with them, you don't debate. You've already got your probable cause to stop this person. Then issue the ticket or not. But we tell officers, as soon as you can tell somebody why you stopped them, that's part of de-escalation. So it depends on the situation. If it's an exigent circumstance, they probably can wait a little bit. Maybe they can't, but they should be telling you why you were stopped. You have a right to ask that question. They should be telling you why you were stopped. One of the things that I hate to see officers do, well, give me your information first, and then I'll tell you. Okay, it should be, Nikki, this is why ma'am, I'll give you an example. Okay, ma'am, how you doing? I'm Officer Humphrey with the Sarasota Police Department. I just want to let you know the reason you were stopped is because I observed you not coming to a complete stop at that stop sign. Then my question, then the next thing would be, well, yes, sir, I did stop. Ma'am, I understand, and you have a right to think that, but I just want to make sure, is everything okay? Everything's okay. Okay, ma'am. I see your driver's license and your insurance. Well, why? Well, you have to have a driver's license and insurance to drive on a public street. I'd like to see it. You did proceed. Now, what I'm doing is trying to de-escalate. That's the procedural justice part. And then there is a probability that individual is going to, now you put that person at ease, just the fact that you are communicating with that person. It's not going to always happen, but that is a way to de-escalate. So officers should be telling you why. They should be communicating with you. They should be telling you, I'll be right back with you. If you ask them, I'm gonna write you, are you gonna write me a citation? The question is the answer is gonna be, I don't know yet. There's a possibility. There are some officers that will tell you, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, I am going to issue a citation. Just sit right here.
Yeah. So Nikki has another question. She says, is it possible for police to have only is it possible for police forces to have only minority officers patrol minority areas and minority people?
So let me answer that. We get that question a lot. Nikki, and that doesn't always work well. I get what you're saying. Should people that look like the community police that community only? I'm totally against that. I think your force has to be diverse and look like your community. But I will tell you that it goes back to the 1940s and 30s and 40s when that's all that black police officers or Hispanic police officers could patrol. They could only patrol in the areas that they of the community that they resemble. And I go back to how those officers were transported to those areas. They weren't allowed to drive cars to those areas. They were transported to those areas while they sat in the back seat, and they were left alone in those areas for their entire shift. So I understand what you're saying, but I believe that when you have a police department that you start putting officers who look like that area of the community, then it segregates the whole city. And let me tell you this, not everybody who looks like that person, those people in that community, value those individuals in that community. I've seen that. And so I think that it helps if you have someone that grew up in that community that's familiar with it, but to have an area that if you have a predominantly African-American area and to have that area patrolled specifically by African-Americans is not a good idea.
Yeah. Well, hey, and I'm going to add to that too, Keith, because I'm going to go back to my time as a police chief in Helena, West Helena in Arkansas, where the police department was probably 95% African American. The city was about 65% African American, and the majority of these officers, well, all of these officers pretty much grew up in that community or in that area. And those who did grow up there had a very poor relationship with that city, with that community. Not all of them did, but there was a handful that did and who abused their authority. And so, Nikki, just because we all look alike don't mean we're going to treat each other the same way. And because I spent a lot of time discipline officers because of the way that they talk to people and the way they treated people. And Keith, to the point to where they said, well, we grew up with each other. We went to school with each other. That doesn't give you the right to do that. You cannot abuse your authority just because you're the police. Now you're the police. But that is something that when I've talked about the culture of policing, even in Black police officers, there is a culture of policing where they kind of feel this superiority where, you'll have a white officer that would treat Black citizens better than a Black police officer will. And I think Candy, she said, I agree, it causes abuse. Well, it can.
And then there's an argument here in Little Rock. Our Latino community is growing, and we're hiring more Latino officers. Now, do you need more Latino officers in that area based on being bilingual? Absolutely. Do you need all Latino officers? Absolutely not. But you do need, you have to have a mixture, and that's just facts as far as when you have a community that has a large, fast-growing population of individuals who don't speak English. You need to be able to communicate with those individuals, and you might have more Hispanic, Latino officers in that area. One of the things how you determine that is what's your calls for service. How much, are your calls for service? Is it more in the areas where there are individuals who don't speak English? And so I think there are those times when you do need that, but as far as just putting people in areas because they look a certain way and nothing else, and you believe that those officers in that area are going to be more empathetic. No, 34 years, I've seen just the opposite.
Yeah. Well, and Keith and Nikki, as she says, yes, you're saying that all skin is not kin, but she states that the status quo is not working. And Nikki, black police officers are minorities in this police industry. And so we don't see the same level of black male and black female that are in policing as we do with other races. So when it comes to and Keith, I believe there's probably more Latino police officers across the country than there are blacks.
Well, let me say this, Virgil. That's a good point. That is a good point. I just had a conversation the other day with my training commander. And what my training commander was saying is that we're starting to see a increase of minority officers apply. We're not seeing the white male officers applying at the rate that we used to. We're starting to see more females, black, white females, Latino males, African American males, Asian males apply throughout the nation. So we're starting to see more minorities than we are whites as far as law enforcement, because let's just face it, law enforcement for years has been a predominantly white male profession. And so we're starting to see a little bit of a turn. And I do believe I'm going to credit that to I think the incidents that occurred with George Floyd and the attention that was brought to police brutality, I think that we're starting to see more people of color showing interest. There was some apathy toward law enforcement and being police officers at one point, but we're starting to see more minorities apply for the positions.
Well, you're right, Keith, and I think you've got it depends upon what part of the country you're in where
Absolutely.
you're starting to see an increase. You're starting, as across the country, there's been a definitely increase in officers retirement, officers just leaving and going to other departments because of whatever police reforms that the city has implemented that they don't like, that they want to go somewhere else where those reforms are not in place. And so, but also you're starting to see some increase in minority women who want to get into policing. And I think it's upon people that look like me and you and female police officers to really engage in the minority community, whether they are Latinos or whether they are African Americans or even Native Americans or even Asians, because community police departments really need to look like the communities that they serve. And this isn't saying, hey, white police officers shouldn't be applying, but this is saying that you need to have a police force that understands the community. Yeah, you got a lot of white police officers who understand the community to some extent. I would say more than some black police officers do.
Well, let me say this too, man. And a perfect example of what you're saying is that the police department should resemble a community was Ferguson, Missouri. I think the police department of 60 officers, and they only had 2 African American officers, and I don't even think they had any female officers. And so that was a big topic of discussions when they did the after action report, and then some other studies regarding you can't have empathy for your community if you don't understand the culture of your community. And so I have a good friend of mine that was the interim chief there that made that point. And so, the main focus was this: we need to hire more minority officers. Yeah. And so I I think Ferguson has done that. And that was also part of the consent decree that they were placed under. But Nikki says, how fast do you think police forces would prevent minority police officers in white communities if black police officers began harassing white citizens? Virgil, what do you think?
Let me pull up her question again.
She wants to know if you had black police officers harassing whites in predominantly white neighborhoods, how long do you think it would take for the chief or someone to remove those officers from that area if they got enough calls about it, or even one call?
It wouldn't take long, Nikki. I mean, we've got, give an example, in Oklahoma City, for those who live in Oklahoma City or who don't live in Oklahoma City, there is a suburb within the city of Oklahoma City called Nichols Hills. Very affluent white city. And a friend of mine was a police officer. Actually, I've had two friends who've been police officers in Nichols Hills. Nichols Hills at any given time may or may not have a minority officer. When they hired him, he got a lot of phone calls about what is this black officer doing pulling me over? Because people in Nichols Hills, they're bankers, they're lawyers, they're pretty well off, so they don't feel that a black officer was entitled to pull them over for a traffic violation. And this is, late 2000s, so it's that officer probably wouldn't be with that department too much longer. He would be put on a shift where people wouldn't see him.
Well, let me say this: depends on who that citizen called.
Yeah, well, if he called the mayor, he wouldn't be there.
If he called the mayor, there's going to be some, and I've seen this happen in some cities. There's going to be a discussion regarding, and depends on who that individual is. There are going to be some discussions about, well, this citizen said this, and do you know who this citizen is? And man, we gotta, is there anywhere else you can put that officer? And then that in itself is, man, that's why mayors and city managers have to stay out of police issues. They can bring that to your attention. You can investigate it like any other investigation. You don't treat it any different because this person's a millionaire, this person's a billionaire. You don't treat that officer any different. You go and you look at the body camera to see what's happening, what actually happened, and then you come back with, this is my response. This is what I saw. But you don't, I've seen that. I'm telling you as a police chief, and Virgil can tell you this. The ball starts rolling more rapidly when, depending on the amount of money that calls and makes the complaint. And that is a problem.
Yeah,
exactly. That is a problem when case in point, I've never told my officers, well, now you got to go over in this area because such and such has contributed to the mayor or the mayor city council person's campaign. Hey, listen, they've been having problems up in this area. We need extra patrol. You can't make it a political thing. You can't mix politics and law enforcement together. But so it's that's why politics and law enforcement have to remain separate.
Yeah.
It's got to remain separate for those reasons.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, Nikki is firing these questions out tonight, brother. She's got a lot to talk about, and Nikki, we definitely thank you. And I've got to go back up to something that Tony commented. He says about a hot minute, Miss Nikki is time response, and I think he said something else, but something about the skin and the kin. So,
but let me say this too, Virgil. Let me say this. Let me say this though. But I have seen white officers that have gotten in trouble. And there was a situation in Fort Worth, and the officer arrested a mom and a daughter on an incident based on something that a white male said that her young child had done. If I make no mistake, I think the mom and daughter may have been tased, or they may have had maced. But anyway, they go to jail, determined that there was a bad arrest. The officers put on administrative leave. The chief made very clear, once he handed down a discipline for that officer, he made it very, very clear that that officer was not going back to that area because he lacked the cultural empathy for the area, which was predominantly African American. So I have seen officers be removed quickly based on their actions. I've seen officers moved just based on the fact of, depending on the type of discipline they received, depending on what their history is as far as discipline. So I have seen it occur, and I've seen it with black and white officers.
Well, hey, Keith, Nikki's other question is, he says, so if you admit that the reverse would be addressed quickly, why not advocate for black officers only in black communities?
What I said earlier is that depending on who that officer is, and depending on who's calling, and depending on that police chief, it depends on the politics on whether that officer is going to be removed quickly if it's an African American officer in a white community. But what I was saying mostly is I've seen it work both ways. I've seen black officers move from areas where they were harassing African Americans, and I've seen whites removed from white areas where they were, and those officers are either put on the desk. I've seen officers terminated for that, but I'm still not an advocate for having all the same ethnicity of officers, the same ethnicity of officers and community, just because a person looks a certain way. That's segregation. That is separating the community. And then basically what you're saying is, as a police chief, I don't trust this officer over here because you look a certain way, but I trust this officer over here because you look a certain way. That's not right. That's segregation. That's no different than black only and white only. That's no different. Yeah. You take that officer based on that individual officer's behavior, not based on that officer's ethnicity.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, and I'm going to add this to the conversation. So, Nikki, you've got black police officers working in all black communities. Now, let's go back, let's say 50 years ago, when black police officers, that's all that they were allowed to work. You had black police officers in Oklahoma City and in Dallas, pretty much every major city. Black police officers could only work in black communities in those areas. And so one of the good things about that, Keith, was the fact that back then you had officers who walked the beat. They knew everybody up and down the streets, the business owners, the people who lived in that community. So they had a connection to that community because, yeah, we all look like each other. Well, now shift into the times that we're in now, where you've got some black police officers who don't even want to work in black communities. Yeah,
but Virgil, I'm looking at Little Rock right now. You have some predominantly African American predominantly African American areas that they don't want any police officers. These citizens don't want these African American citizens don't want any police officers in their area. They want to be able to police their own areas. The areas that they live in. They don't want any police officer. Doesn't matter black, white, doesn't matter if that officer's mother, uncle, grandmother live in that area. They don't want police. And I run into that more than I do white citizens who want police in the area no matter what. But I will tell you that And then a lot of this, I saw it even more after the George Floyd incident. I saw it more, and I saw a little bit during Michael Brown incident, but I saw it even more after George Floyd. That there were people that say there were black people that said we don't want police. It doesn't matter what ethnicity, it doesn't matter what gender. We don't want police officers in our neighborhood. We want to be able to, and there were some, of the community members who call that real community oriented policing.
Yeah.
And I was able, there were a couple of people that were more vocal about it, but
yeah,
you can't do that.
Yeah,
you just can't do that.
Yeah. Hey, Keith, I'm going to pull up some information on probable cause here. Did I lose you?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Okay.
I didn't hear you. You got the screen up. Let me say something real quick. Pale Leaders.
Dale. Dale is our brother who has the other podcast, Black and Blue.
Okay, man, what's going on, man? Thank you for joining us. So, he's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think I mentioned that earlier. Minority officers were only able to arrest individuals that look like them. They were not allowed to arrest whites. That was the policy. Not even allowed to ride in the front seat with white officers. They had to ride in the back seat. So you're absolutely correct. And so we fought so hard to get away from that. We have fought so hard to get away from being segregated and policing, and this is the thing that I want to make sure that I point out. We never want to get to a point where it seems as though only people who look like us can control people who look like us. That I don't ever want that. I don't ever want it to be that, just to be that blatant.
Yeah.
So anyway,
So hey, we got Tony Hollis has a comment. He says, however, I will offer that Black police officers participating in an anonymous study throughout this nation and ask the question why Black police officers are reluctant to use excessive force or shoot to kill white people. Or do you guys know anything about this study? I don't know anything about it.
I know something. I know that there's some studies out there, Tony, and I know there's some studies out there that talk about Black officers use less force than whites, and that because there is a study out there, and please forgive me, I'm not sure what the actual name is, but there is a study that states that African American officers have a better way of de-escalating incidents, which can prevent the use of force or the use of deadly force, based on the fact of the way they talk. And it's a lot of times it's about command presence. How do you look when you get out of your car? Do you look professional? Do you look confident? Are you calm? And so I think, Dale comes back and he says, I would say I'm reluctant to use excessive force against anyone. I totally agree. You shouldn't use, but what I do say, Dale, any type of force is ugly. And so really and truly, for the most of the community, any type of force you use, if they don't understand why you're using it, they believe that's excessive force. The communities, whether it's black, white, Latino, any type of force that you use, even when you handcuff people, people believe that that's an excessive amount of force. If you use OC spray or mace in order to de-escalate, not have to escalate to a higher force, that's excessive force. So I think anytime a person doesn't know the full story, or that we utilize our techniques to make arrest or to gain control, they believe it's excessive force. But I'm like you, that's the last resort for me to use force on anyone. And I go back to, I believe that's the first level of the force continuum, which is command presence.
Yeah.
I was talking to a trooper, and African American trooper here in the state. He's retired, and he still stays in really good shape. And he pulled over a car, and I think these individuals has either just shot somebody or they had robbed a bank, and they were contemplating. He was out there alone, like most troopers are out there alone, and they were contemplating killing him. But when he got out of the car and he had that command presence, uniform was pressed, confidence, the way he walked, they decided not to do it because it was like, man, this guy is sharp. He looks like he would give us a fight for our run for our money if we did try to do that. So I think the command presence does play a role. I think the calmness, I do think that plays a role, but I believe there's facts that, and I don't know if it's because there's more white officers than there are black officers in the nation, but I do believe that there is proof out there that black officers do utilize force at a lower rate than white officers.
Than white officers do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, hey, Keith, Nikki has got another comment. I want to read it. She says it was once considered an allowance regarding black officers being allowed to work only black communities. It should now be thought of as an honor and a privilege. Again, the status quo is not working otherwise.
It goes back to the police department and the relationship with the entire community. You know, I'll give you an example. Tommy Norman over in North Little Rock. He's a prime example of a white officer that believes in community-oriented policing, and the African American community loves him. I have a couple officers here, same thing. As a matter of fact, I was at a community meeting 2 weeks ago, and one of my lieutenants, who's a young white male, we had several African American citizens of different age groups and ethnic and gender said, "Hey, we appreciate you out here, Lieutenant, because you understand the needs and the concerns of the African American community, and you demonstrate so much respect out here to the African American community. You show empathy, and you're always available." And I thought that was just amazing. So not every city experiences that excessive force used by white officers. You have white officers that are very committed to minority neighborhoods, but I'm a firm believer you have to be committed to the entire city. But you have to understand the cultural, the culture of the community and the needs of that community, because there are some communities that they don't have. I'm not saying you treat people better or worse, but there are some communities that you really have to understand the history of the minority community and law enforcement. Yeah. You don't treat somebody different because they live in a gated community with a $2 million house compared to someone who lives in a house that's about to fall. And you don't treat anybody different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, Keith, Dale said that he was emphasizing Tony's use of force, or Tony's use of excessive force. He says excessive force is always illegal and unwarranted. If it's justified, then it's not excessive.
I think that definition is very subjective, because I know people and I've heard police officers use that excessive force, and instead of using the term force, more force than necessary to control someone. But I get it. We've used excessive force, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of officers or where there's community members that believe even a handcuffing is excessive, and so they say that's excessive force. So I get what he's saying. If it isn't, if it's not excessive, it's not criminal or illegal. But I think the term sometimes is very subjective, because what's excessive to me may not be excessive to someone else.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, Tony Hollis says, thanks for response. I raised a point because it goes to the psychological effect of what Black officers have to deal with, and it should not be so. So Black officers are policing under the most extreme conditions and underpaid. He said he might add.
I tell you what, it is a stressful job, and it's a minute by minute, a job that makes you think minute by minute. It's a job that at that particular time, there are those incidents where you can't second guess yourself. And then there are those times when you second guess yourself, it can cause you or someone else to get hurt. But it is African-American officers, I will tell you just from my experience, we are treated differently in certain situations. We are targeted in certain situations, internally and externally. We don't get opportunities like some of our counterparts. That's just facts. And I'm saying this as an African-American police chief that has witnessed it firsthand. It's sad, but as an African-American chief, I have a platform to make sure that everyone in my department gets a fair opportunity, because a lot of times, for the most part, that's all people want, a fair opportunity. But when you don't give somebody, when you start putting people in positions and not opening up processes and things like that, when you tell people, hey man, you can go over here and handle this a lot better than someone else, or, well, you need to go over there and handle the Black problems. I mean, I've heard things like this. Hey, we got you out here with us in this area because you're Black and we know you can run fast. I mean, those are the type of things that I've been subjected to. And I made it very clear when I got to this point, those type of things were not going to be tolerated. I made it very clear that they weren't going to be tolerated. So, yeah, Nikki, you're absolutely right. When a person can't breathe, that is excessive force. George Floyd died as a result of excessive force. Absolutely. You can't argue that. Anybody who tries to argue that with you they're completely oblivious to what's going on in the nation. But what I go back and say, sometimes people believe what they see is excessive force, when sometimes it's not excessive force, it's necessary force. But to the person who doesn't understand the force continuum, that is what they're going to say. And there's nothing you can do to change that person's mind. And but when you get to a point where a person can't breathe and they're telling you they can't breathe, or you get to the point where you are utilizing force and you're striking someone with a baton, or you're utilizing a taser just because you don't have a reason for doing it. You're using these tools or these maneuvers just because you can. You have them. You've learned them. You want to use them. That is excessive force. Matter of fact, Nikki, that's criminal. That's not just a policy violation. Those type of cases should be referred to a prosecuting attorney or district attorney to review for prosecution of that officer. So I get it. I get it.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, we're coming up on the last 5 minutes of the show, and we want to definitely thank Tony, Nikki, Dale, and everybody else, Candy, who has tuned in to join in on this topic that we talked about tonight, because I think it was a really good topic, and I think it's something that we need to probably do another podcast on, about what is reasonable suspicion versus probable cause. And so Dale says, I was once on a task force and we did a knock and talk on a house where a black guy answered. The white officer couldn't talk his way in, but I came up and got it and got it done.
Hey, Virgil and Dale, I wasn't there, but I can tell you, and Dale, please tell me if this is right. There was a bunch of yelling and screaming at that young man that opened the door. There was a bunch of directions being given to that individual, and no one could. Or the young man was being told conflicting commands, and it got heated. And you were the voice of reason. Please email if I'm right, because I didn't even have to be there to know what that was about, because I've seen that occur. Virgil, you've seen that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've seen it. Dale has seen it.
Officers lose it. Officers lose.
Yeah.
They lose control. Yeah. And we've all as African American police chiefs and officers, we've all had to take over that situation.
Yeah.
We have all had to take over that situation because the person that's there has escalated it to a point that if they would have just been, if they had used procedural justice and been calm and explained, it may not go to the level. That's not always the case, but let's just say this too. Do you not believe there are times when we as African Americans can say things to people who look like us that white officers can't say, to possibly get a person who looks like us to comply?
Yeah.
Do you agree that happens sometimes?
Yeah.
Okay. But see, Dale said absolutely yes. Dale, I've been in that situation. Me and Virgil can tell you, just like you, we didn't even have to be there. I know exactly what happened. I've seen it.
Well, and you turn around and you look at that, you look at that officer kind of like, dude, just go somewhere and move, stand over here, let us deal with it.
I've had to take over many calls like that. I've had to take over many calls, but at the same time, I've had white officers step in when you have white citizens that refuse to talk to me because I look a certain way. And I've had officers say, hey man, we're out of here. If you can't talk to him, you're not going to
talk to us.
We're going to go. I've had that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had white officers have to calm black officers down.
Exactly. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. It goes both ways. It definitely does. And so Dale says, funny thing, we can do that with black folks, white folks, Latinos, and Asians. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
We all know it. We can all look back in our careers, and we can all say we were the calming, we were the voice of reason in that situation. Because it just takes one person. I've had people say, "Man, I'm not talking to him," and basically, man, you disrespect me, and and especially what people have to realize, Virgil, and to Dale and Nikki and stuff, Nikki and others. This is the thing people have to realize. Even if you have a search warrant, you're still in somebody's house. So when you go into somebody's house and you tell them to sit the F down, or you throw them around and there's no need to, just because you have a warrant, do you not know that can dehumanize or demean a man or a woman's being? The fact that, hey, you just came into my house. I'm not saying I'm not wrong, but you just came into my house that I pay for, and you are telling me what to do. You are being rude to me, disrespectful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, man, we're coming up on that time of the hour, man, and it's definitely been a great podcast. And let's get to Dale's last question. He says, never had that happen to me, but I've had males not talk to or give respect to a female officer. Yeah.
Been there.
Exactly. So, hey, guys, we definitely want to thank you all for tuning in for another episode of You and the Law podcast on streaming on Facebook Live. And we want to thank you for tuning in. And next week, we go back to our regular time. Is that right, T-Swag? 6 p.m.
Right. Yeah. I'll be coming from Washington, D.C. I'll be hosting from Washington, D.C. My man, I think you'll be hosting from somewhere else too, won't you?
I will be, and we will talk about that next week.
All right.
So thank everybody for tuning in to You and the Law podcast show. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Have a good night.